Mr. Speaker, I move that notwithstanding the governor's veto of Senate Bill 4, the bill be passed. Body, this is the repeal of the 3-day grace period. We've debated this extensively. All I would add to that original debate is since that debate's happened, there's been a ton of stuff on social media, emails to the committee, and discussions with members of this body claiming that the numbers that I gave up here for how many ballots were rejected because they weren't postmarked in the 2024 primary were somehow concocted or not true. The Secretary of State of the state of Kansas went all over the state in September, October, telling Kansans that he was very concerned about the mail delivery of ballots. And he told us that 1,000 ballots in the primary were not counted because they were received during the 3-day grace period without a postmark. That is 1 out of 3 approximately of all of the ballots that were received in this 3-day grace period couldn't be counted, despite the fact that the voter did everything right and the election office did everything right. They weren't postmarked, so they couldn't be counted. 32 other states in the country have already solved this problem by making election night the last day that they accept ballots. Because if election night is the last day that we accept ballots, they don't need a postmark, because unless the voter sent them back in a time machine, they were cast before election night at 7 p.m. The other thing I would say about this, I've heard some concerns about timelines and when mail-in ballots are sent out. Mail-in ballots are sent out 20 days before the election. And so we all need to encourage our voters, as soon as they get those mail-in ballots, if they choose to vote by mail, vote them and get them back in the mail and send them back, or drop them off at the election clerk's office, or drop them off on one of the over 200 drop boxes around the state so that they get counted. You know, I understand where the other side is coming from. They say, well, 2,000 ballots show up during the 3-day grace period. It's actually probably closer to 3,000, and they will not be counted. Well, over the 3 years I've been working on this bill and trying to get this passed, the Secretary of State has repeatedly told us that before there was a 3-day grace period, 2,000 ballots would show up after the election. And now that there's a 3-day grace period, 2,000 ballots show up after the 3-day grace period. I think Kansas voters are smart. I think if we tell them what the rules are, they'll adjust their behavior to get their ballots in on time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been a bunch of things set up here at the well, and I just want to correct some facts. First of all, you heard that this disproportionately disenfranchises rural voters. The 3-day grace period disproportionately disenfranchises rural voters because their ballots are less likely to get postmarked before they are sent to the election clerk's office, so they're less likely to get counted. You heard somebody say, well, golly, we should have done something bipartisan and extended the timeline for mail-in votes or mail-in ballots. You will remember we tried to do that last year and they still voted it down. So I think that's a red herring. Second or third, you heard people say, this is all about voter integrity and this does nothing to improve voter integrity. Did you hear me say anything about election integrity up here? I'm just trying to make sure every ballot is counted. You heard a couple things about the Secretary of State up here. You heard somebody contend that Loud Light Civic Action has the real numbers and the duly elected Secretary of State lied to us about how many ballots weren't counted. I'm more predisposed to believe what the Secretary of State said. You also heard somebody say that the Secretary of State supports the 3-day grace period. That is a bold-faced lie. I apologize, but that is a bold-faced lie. The 3-day grace period bill that we heard in my committee, the Secretary of State came and testified as neutral, talking about the numbers that I've told you up here, and said that this is a policy decision to be made by this body. And finally, you heard that military voters are going to be disenfranchised. We've already had this debate. Military votes are not subject to the 3-day grace period. They are covered by UACAVA. They get 45 days with their mail-in ballot, and they have to be in on election night. This has nothing to do with military voters. It will in no way change the chances that their ballots can be counted. I'll just finish with this. We have a voter confidence problem in this country. We owe it to Kansans to be able to ensure them that their vote's going to be counted. And right now, with the 3-day grace period, there's a 1 in 3 chance that if their ballot shows up in that 3-day grace period, it's going to be counted. So let's just do what 32 other states have done and stop taking ballots on election night. With that, Mr. Speaker, I close.